It's been mixed news for Disney this week with a rocky earnings report, but some really good news for Guardians of the Galaxy. Let's start with Guardians and what that means for the MCU going forward. Guardians is having an excellent second week, only seeing a 51% drop, much better than expected. Estimates are putting the movie just shy of $50 million for this second weekend. Now, this movie is certainly gonna make money, as I talked about in the last video, but it's not gonna be enough to save this franchise or turn things around. It's also a sign that the brand has been damaged, perhaps beyond repair. First, let's take a look at the trajectory here and make some predictions about the final total. Now, looking at the first two movies is the best that we can do here. My personal prediction is that it's gonna land in the low 700s because I think the audience is just tired of the MCU, but there's some reason to think that it might be a bit higher. In the last video, I said 7 to 725. I may have to readjust that up to like 750-ish, but I'm probably gonna shoot a little low on this one. So if we look at the first movie, it opened up with a $94 million weekend. And then if we look at the second movie, that one outdid its predecessor by far with $146 million right there. This third movie has opened up with $118 million, so kind of in the middle. Again, if we look back at the first movie, we ended up with a final total of about $770 million. And then the second movie outdid that one, $863 million worldwide. So with this movie opening in the middle of these two and maintaining in the middle of these two after the second weekend, I think it's a pretty solid prediction that it's gonna end up in the middle of these two. So probably closer to that 800 million mark. Like I said, I'm gonna be a little bit on the low side, I think, because this one definitely has legs for the second weekend. If we go back to that first movie and take a look at the second weekend final, it was at 176 domestic by the time the second weekend ended. And then the second movie ended its second weekend here at 248 million. We don't have exact numbers, but it's looking like we're going to be just over 200 million domestic for the third movie. So yeah, riding right between those two movies, I think it's safe to say it's probably going to hit right at that 800 mark, maybe in the high sevens. So my 725 is going to be a little on the low side. Now, one big problem that we're going to see with this movie is that its budget outstrips the other two by a wide margin. So far, the reports are that this movie is costing $250 million to make compared to 200 for the previous and 170 for the first entry. And that 250, that's kind of a rough number. That also includes the Christmas special. You got to remember that this movie is in production for 5 years. So later on, if Deadline comes out and reports that it was actually like 275 or 300, I'm not going to be shocked at all. Screen Rant here is estimating possibly $600 million to break even. I think with the amount of marketing that Marvel is having to do just to pull the crowds in, I think that 600 is a little bit on the low side. I think it's going to be closer to 700 for that break even point after you factor in all the marketing they were having to do. So yeah, it's definitely gonna make money. Even if it ends up in the low 700s, they are going to profit, but it's not high enough by Disney standards, and it's not gonna make up for the other products they have that are losing money. The Lightyears, the Strange Worlds, the products that they had for phase 5 and 6 that we know have already been canceled or postponed indefinitely. That's money that's already been spent, and they need big winners like this one to really win big to offset those costs, and this is just not doing it. I don't think we've got final numbers yet for Ant-Man, but I think if that broke even, it barely did. I've made multiple videos now about why the Marvels is not gonna make money. I think that's gonna be a big loser for MCU. I think that this movie was going to be their biggest performer of the last 12 months and the next 12 months. Like, this was going to be the high watermark for the MCU for quite some time as they try to get their plan together for phase 5 and 6. Phase 4, we all know, was a big disaster. They didn't have a direction. The TV shows last year didn't have a big audience. The TV shows this year don't have a big audience so far. This was gonna be the peak for Marvel, and barely making $100 or $200 million in MCU terms, it's not that much money. If it was a different studio, they would be popping champagne already, but these people need hundreds of millions of dollars in profit every single time. That's how they've set themselves up. Part of the reason they're not making a lot of money is because the margins are just getting slim. Disney's most recent earnings report tells the same exact story. The entire company is running this way. Last week saw a mixed report from the House of Mouse and a substantial drop in the stock afterward. First up, we got the good news. The company's earnings rose year over year. They saw a 13% increase in quarterly earnings to $21.8 billion. Now, these big increases are great, but it's unclear if they're going to hold or if they're just a rebellion against the virus of unknown origins. If we go over and zoom out, we can see that revenue is roughly back to pre-pandemic levels, even a little bit higher. So that looks really good. So if we take a look at 2022, they made $28 billion. If you take a look at pre-pandemic levels, you're looking at 27 and 19, 26 and 18, right? You can see these really big numbers. They're making over $20 billion a year. During the pandemic, we dropped in the low 20s. That's when they actually lost money for those years. And now we're back at 28. So we're looking really good as far as revenue goes. Unfortunately, the problems are a bit deeper for Disney than a couple of good quarters are able to solve. The number one thing plaguing the company right now is operating costs, and Iger knows it, hence the layoffs that are going on. Everything they do is costing more than other companies. If we change over to the net profit, we're looking at a very different story. 2022 saw a net gain of just $3 billion, which is the kind of money they were making 10 years ago. 11 years ago, they were making $3, $4, $5 billion in profit. Just before the pandemic, you're seeing 8, 9, 12, $11 billion profits. Obviously, during the pandemic, they lost a few billion. The year afterward, they were barely scraping by. As $1 billion, $2 billion, that's a lot of money. But for a company the size of Disney, these are not the kind of numbers that they need to be seeing. And now we're post-pandemic, 2022, we're only seeing a $3 billion profit. That is why the stock is dropping, because numbers like that are not going to inspire investors for a multinational, multi-billion dollar company. It's just not to the standard that they have set for themselves. Not only are they not making the profit that they used to, but if we take a look at the long-term debt for Disney, we see back when they were making single-digit billions in profit per year, they were carrying long-term debt of about $10 to $12 billion. But then the pandemic hit and they had to borrow $40 billion just to stay afloat. So now you look at 22, they're carrying $45 billion in debt. They're only making $3, $4, $5 billion profit a year. It's going to take them a decade to pay this long-term debt down at the rate they're making money. This is why Iger is so keen on cutting operating costs right now. He's making a lot of bad decisions, but that is one of the best ones. He knows just 1 or 2 bad quarters is going to set this company back tens of billions of dollars. The pandemic proved that. Naturally, the big news that everybody's talking about from the earnings report is the drop in subscribers. A 4 million subscriber loss, which is on top of last quarter's 2.2 million subscriber loss. It's not painting a good picture for the future of this service. One little silver lining is that they are losing less each quarter. Last year, they were losing over $1 billion a quarter on this service, and now it's only $700 million they lost last quarter. It's technically moving in the right direction. It's still not something to brag about. The CFO did say she expects the operating loss to go back up next quarter by about $100 million. Now, one other little bit of good news is that they are making more per subscriber. I made a video last year that they were only making about $4.50 per subscriber, where something like Netflix, they're making $10 or $11 per subscriber. So yeah, they have 150 million subscribers, but they're making next to nothing for each one. That number has since gone up. I believe it's 650 now. That number is moving in the right direction. They're making more per person, but now they're starting to lose subscribers. The reason that investors were so freaked out because of that subscriber drop, not only was it 2 drops quarter after quarter, but also it means a loss of future stability. Businesses love subscriber-based models because it's revenue they can count on. As the pandemic showed, park visits can turn on a dime, but subscriber counts tend to fluctuate less severely. This is why in the video game world, Xbox is beating PlayStation. Sure, fewer Xbox consoles have been shipped to consumers, but Xbox subscription service is making Microsoft money each and every month on a very consistent basis. So after they announced a massive drop in subs for the second straight quarter, investors got very nervous, and we saw this humongous 8% drop in the stock overnight. For a company the size of Disney, a multi-billion-dollar company, a drop like this in just a few hours is huge. Again, if we zoom out, what we can see here is that Disney is trading at the same level that it was just a few years ago. Back in 2015 is the last time they were trading in the 90s. So 8 years later, we haven't made any headway whatsoever. Investors are nervous because they don't see changes being made at Disney that are going to carry the company forward. And honestly, I can't blame them. So what are your thoughts on the Guardians movie? Do you think it's going to have legs? It's going to hit that 800 million mark? What are your thoughts on Disney's future? Are they turning things around, or is this a temporary boost fueled by post-pandemic freedom? Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.